So I'm Matt Fleury. I'm an applications architect for Turner. So I've worked on NCAA, TBS, like pretty much like half these websites out here for about 8 years now. So it's a lot. It's a great company to work at. My little spiel. So who knows what headless or decoupled Drupal is? Like everybody? Awesome. So I guess like the definition I pulled offline is a separation between the back end and one or more front ends. So why would I want that? So, I mean, some people say it's faster. Like there's a huge debate in the community about like, why would I want that? And so like, I don't really have time to go into all that right now. Like that's not what the session's about. If you want, we can talk about it and I can talk about it, just not right now. So how many devs does it take to build a headless Drupal site? So that's what I'm actually here to talk about. So does anybody like build a headless Drupal site at their job? So like how many people are on that team?
So it depends on how you look at it. I actually argued against it. It was one where our CEO wanted to have a science project. And because it's a science project, it ends up with whoever touches it. But we've never had more than like 2 or 3 people on it at a time. And that's actually caused some problems because stuff that in the old days any of them would have been able to do by themselves. Now you've got to have at least a strong React guy and a strong back-end guy. And making sure both those guys are on the bench to work on the science project at the same time is
All right, how about you?
It's kind of the same experience. It was kind of a side project for our own website. And I think we had, like, at some point, like 8 people working on it.
Did you say 8?
Yeah, I think so. Like, when we had a downtime, it's like we could throw everyone at this project. But I think usually we had, like, 4 people working on it in the main area. So.
Okay, so that's kind of, oh, sorry.
It's not really a headless site, but worked on an Angular progressive site. And kind of the same thing. We had, the company started it basically, had some people that were really big in Angular, and then they decided they had to use Drupal as the back end because that was the client's requirement. But yeah, they had like started off with 1 Drupal person and 2 or 3 Angular people, but kind of the same thing. You had that separation in there. You know, we had a couple of times where I did stuff on the Drupal side, and the guy that was doing the Angular part goes, you know, wait, that doesn't, not working the way I thought it would.
Right. So that's kind of always been my experience. I'm like, if I was going to build a headless site, like I need 5 people, like I need 10 people for like a really big one. Like that's the only way it's going to work. Like you can't just have a small team with that. So when a small team at Turner came up and they were like, hey, we're going to build a headless site. I'm like, you guys have 3 devs. No, that's a terrible idea. You cannot do that. Like it is technically impossible for you to maintain that website. And so then what ended up happening is a coworker of mine at CNN, which is a really big website, he went out and he built a headless Drupal site by himself for CNN and then launched it in production. And I was like, it's gonna crash, it's gonna burn, like this is never gonna work. And it didn't. And it's still out in production. And I'm like, but no, like that doesn't happen. You can't do that. Like, no, it's impossible. Like you'd have to know Drupal, you'd have to know PHP, you'd have to know Nginx or Apache, and then you'd have to know Node, you'd have to know like React or Angular or Vue. Like nobody knows, like nobody's an expert at everything on here. And if they are, like they're a unicorn and like you can't afford them. Like you can't hire somebody who knows all these things because they're not out there. You might be able to like dabble in some of them, but it's not gonna work. And then hosting, like you still have to host a Drupal site and a Node site. It's ridiculous. So what he ended up doing was he built a Drupal site on PHP with Nginx, and then he hosted a GraphQL server in Node, which then talked to another Node server, which hosted a React app. And so he built it out this way so that his GraphQL server can talk to Drupal, but it can also talk to anything else it needs to talk to, because it's CNN, so they need to be able to pull in from CNN's actual APIs as well. So he did it. And I'm like, how did you do this? He's like, well, I didn't touch Drupal. I installed some Drupal contrib modules, and then he's a fantastic Node developer, so he can pretty much do whatever he wants in Node. I'm like, huh. Well, I'm like, I'm kind of the opposite. So like, I can do whatever I want in Drupal. I can make Drupal, I mean, we did March Madness on NCAA.com, millions and millions of people looking at it. And like, did you hear about the year that March Madness didn't happen? Like, no. But I'm like, but I don't know Node. I can write some JavaScript, but that's about it. So, but I'm like, I want to, because everyone's talking about Headless and people are asking me questions about Headless. So I'm like, and I'm supposed to be an architect for Turner Broadcasting. Like, I should be able to tell somebody like, hey, I built a Headless Drupal website. But I'm like, but I don't know all these things. So what am I going to do? So I built a Headless Drupal site, and it actually works. So it's a really simple blog. So it's mattfleury.com. It was a Drupal site. So I converted it over to a Headless Drupal site, and I have my resume, and I have a simple blog up here. And then I wrote a little blog post. And it's all published out of Drupal into Node.js. So I kind of went against like everything I said. I'm like, this is impossible, but I did this in less than a week. So how is that possible? So I use Drupal, and then I used a tool called Gatsby, and then I host on a provider called Netlify. And Netlify knows how to host Gatsby correctly, so I'll go into a little bit more detail on what all those are. So with Drupal, I installed the Json Api Module. So is everyone familiar with the Json Api Module? All right. So it's just a spec, and then the Drupal module just outputs your data in a way that fulfills that spec. And then Gatsby is everyone familiar with Gatsby? So Gatsby is a static site generator. And it actually has like 1 million plugins out there that'll connect to any sort of data, whether it's GraphQL or JSON API or Markdown files or text files. And then if it doesn't connect to what you want, you can just write your own plugin to pull your data into it. And it pulls all that into a GraphQL server. And then it gives you a GraphQL command in React, because it's all built in React. And then it'll take your React and give you a GraphQL function that'll actually reach out to its GraphQL server directly. So you don't have to configure anything, because I don't really know how to configure a GraphQL server, because I don't write Node.js. Like, I just know a little bit of JavaScript. And then Netlify, they're a hosting platform, so they specify static sites. So they actually will just connect you to a GitHub repo, and then they do automatic deploys for me. So all I had to do was I logged into my GitHub account through Netlify, and they're like, which repo do you want? And I clicked a button, and it was like, hey, this is a Gatsby site. I know how to deploy a Gatsby site. What branch do you want to be your production deploy? And I'm like, master, of course. And then the next thing I know, I got my production website was hosted out at a URL for them. So I'm like, I just deployed a Headless Drupal site. And this was like the easiest thing ever. So I was really excited to come up here and like get to show everyone all this really cool code that I wrote. But I had a problem. I didn't have to write any code, really. So in Drupal, I installed the Json API module and then Json API extras. And so those are required for Gatsby to be able to connect back into Drupal. So it actually talks to Json API and creates a GraphQL endpoint from that. And then I installed this little module, which is not supported, and I found some bugs in it, so I'm going to be contributing that back, hopefully. But Netlify webhooks. So whenever my content gets updated in Drupal, it does fires off a webhook over to Netlify and says, hey, rebuild my website. And then for me, it's about 30 seconds, because I have very little content in my super small website, but I get a brand new website spun up. And so then I had to write some React components. So this was the only code that I really had to write for my entire website. So it's kind of small here, but I loop through all the different pages on my website for my header. So you can see here, this is my header component. And so for this, I have my home page, and then I loop through all the pages inside Drupal that I have, and I stick them all in my header right here. So if I were to go onto my website, and I wanted to publish a new page called About, I can just go in here and publish it. And you'll see it says the build hook initiated. And then if I give this like 30 seconds to a minute, depending on how fast Netlify is right now, I can log in Netlify and see what's going on. So, still going, a little slower this morning than usual. So this fired off a webhook that told Netlify to rebuild my entire website from scratch. And it's all done. I can go back here. And it didn't clear my cache. There we go. So now I have an About page. So I built a headless Drupal site by myself. So I'm like, could I do this like for a production website at Turner? Maybe. Oh, and then the other React component I had to build was I did these wrong. This is the header, and this is the page template. So this is the other one I had to build for my blog posts. I just have to echo out HTML. So that was my super complicated code that I had to write. And then this one was the header. And that's pretty much what I just talked about, was how does it all work. So it just fires off a webhook, and Netlify knows what to do with that. So it rebuilds out all my static HTML. It's all server-side rendered. Gatsby has, like, that's what Gatsby does. It takes your React for you, and it just spits out static HTML that's a React app. And it's all server-side rendered. There's a little plugin in Gatsby called Offline Capabilities. So I installed that, and now I have a single-page web app. So this works as a progressive web app, just because I went into Gatsby and typed in like 3 lines of a code that I found off of a website, and they're like, here's the values that you need. And now this is a progressive web app, which is kind of useless, but if somebody wants to install my progressive web app of my blog, so some of the questions that I kind of came up with are like, my site is way more complicated than a static blog, but kind of at the end of the day, like it may be, but if you really think about some of our sites out there, like they may not be. You might be able to just have a static site sitting out there that gets redeployed once a day or less. And if not, you don't have to use, like this is just one example of something that I threw together in less than a week. Like there are other tools out there. You don't have to be like an expert in Node. Like there are so many, like Node is such this flourishing ecosystem that there's so many tools coming out that, like one of them I found was Next.js. So it does a lot of these same things as Gatsby, except it's not a static site generator. It actually will generate out a dynamic site. So it's a little more complicated, and then you have to host it on Node, which I didn't want to deal with. So, but I mean, like there are options out there. but I don't like React because not everybody likes React. Like, it's not for everybody, but like, just because Gatsby makes you use React, you don't have to use Gatsby. You can use Vue. You can write Vue that pulls in JSON API. You can write GraphQL that gets pulled in by Vue. Like, you can just write plain JavaScript. You don't have to use any of these tools that I'm using. You can do whatever you want. But you don't even like Node. Like, you don't have to use Node either. Like, I could write, like, JSON API is a schema out there, so anything that uses HTTP can talk to that. Like, I could write a Python website, a front end for my Drupal site that runs in Python or Go, or I could write a Symfony website that pulls in my data, and I could render the whole thing out in PHP. Like, if your team is this amazing team that they love PHP and they know everything about PHP, but they have to build a headless Drupal website for some reason, I mean, that can be done. It can work. So how many devs does it take to build a headless Drupal site? I mean, it depends on what you need. If you need, the whole website to be rendered in React and it's going to be this huge front-end application, then like you're probably not going to be able to do that with one person. Like, but I think this whole experience taught me that like there's so many open source tools out there and there's so many people who are trying to do all these things that like it's a lot easier than what I was expecting, and I think you can really surprise yourself. And so I'll have these slides up so you don't actually have to try and read these or memorize any of these things, but these are all the resources that I used, and then I put my blog on there because I'm going to try and be a resource. And yeah, if you have any questions about working at Turner, there's a booth out there that you probably already saw because it's the first thing you see when you walk in. But ask us any questions. It's a great place to work. Some of us here in this room work at Turner.
On the JSON API, I'm assuming it's doing all the security things of validating. You can see the node or you can see the field and all of that sort of stuff.
To the best of my knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. So it's through a view. So.
Well, what I'm saying is, like, that was one of the things we talked about for static side. It's not a problem because you expect that everybody has the same access. So all you care about is that either your GraphQL server in your architecture or your React app directly using GraphQL to query Drupal, then no random person can hit your content server and get stuff. But if you're doing stuff where you've got authenticated content, you've now just taken this wonderful capability that Drupal gives you, and you've thrown it away, and now you've got to build your own bridge to it to get back to what you started with.
Yeah, I was just thinking about general security because basically you're putting. Now I have a data server out there that's called Drupal. If somebody knows how to do the JSON calls, what can they get out of my back end?
Well, in his world, if you're going static, you can like secure it by IP and say only my web server can go back to it. But if you're doing server-side rendering, but then you've got some client interactions and the browser is going to go back to your content server, then you've got your content server better be ready to scale.
Well, you can make your server, you have your server, your editorial server, you can have a firewall, and for doing the JSON API code, you can use JWT, and just at least ask for some authentication. Have this token that you can reuse it for some different calls. I mean, you don't want to expose your data on your schema because
one reason for raising that though is because there's probably a lot of people that are going to be playing around with more complicated sites and not think about, I only want this IP to get access to my data, and so what are the security risks?
It's like basically you just force your Drupal site to only be accessible by tutorials and Netlify. And actually, every single example that I've seen about using Gatsby with JSON API is like go to access and allow like non-authenticated users to see that it's like no, you should like JWT and say just through the login. A few things here and there you have to like figure it out, or maybe people is trying to use this right away and just let's just keep the authentication for now, but then you are seeing blog posts talking about it, doing like this. Since this is first people talking about how to do this, it's like, oh, okay, this is like the de facto way of doing it.
Yeah.
So you're building your navigation by looping over all of the pages that are exposed. Is there a way to get an actual menu? Like you've got menu entities in Drupal. Because you wouldn't necessarily want everything to be just a top level menu.
Right. So that's actually the first thing I did, and I probably spent a day trying to get, because JSON API exposes all the information that you need, but Gatsby's plugin to talk to Drupal doesn't get that information correctly, at least in a way that I could find by spending like a day pouring through their GraphQL output. So I got my menu, but I couldn't get any of the links out of it.
But that's an issue of, it's a JSON API issue, that they don't expose properly the menu line clean, I guess. The way we fix it, it's, what we're trying to fix is creating your own endpoint controller and just like pull that data and expose the data. But the default JSON API endpoint do not expose the menu links, I guess. It's an unknown issue.
Yeah. Well, you can find them, because I went through JSON API and I found my menu links.
Yeah.
But there's no way to figure out, like, to tie them back to my menu.
Yeah, so this seems like, one of the headaches is there's so many different, you can do Gatsby, you can do Node, you can AngularJS, but it does seem like the GraphQL stuff is kind of a common place. It seems like, from a community, it seems like Drupal should be working at saying, oh, we have these entities like taxonomy term, menus, nodes, views, stuff like that. Could somebody do basically develop a Gatsby plugin that knows how to handle all those things? So,
Where's the problem? It's just not exposed properly by Drupal. Is that where the limitation is, or is the limitation on the Gatsby side from being able to understand what Drupal's doing?
So I think my understanding of what I started looking through was, I think it was more on the Gatsby plugin side, that it didn't know how to find it in JSON API, and I'm pretty sure I could figure this out if I had more time, but...
It seems like you could, set up different endpoints. So this is a menu endpoint, this is a node endpoint, and GraphQL should know or whoever should know how to say this is this type of data.
Yeah. So, it's a plugin. I think it's been...
The question I'm wondering is do we have 5 different people or 20 different people out there trying to solve this problem, and should there be, kind of a common, like, who should you go to? Who should, is there any ideas about who you should go to say, raise your hand and say, I want to help solve this problem, and not have it be a custom solution that nobody really uses?
But one would think, if we go down the route that Dries has articulated of let's do a React-based admin panel, that some of that will have to get solved just to be able to pull in things we have to have in order to be like, okay, rearrange my menu items and all that.
And then Gatsby's open source, and they actually push people to contribute. And I started working on something for them, and then I ended up running out of time, so I didn't get to actually finish publishing it out yet.
So you just manually doing your CSS for that, or is there?
So it's all in React, which I had never written CSS in React before. So I started looking at styled components, and that's not what Gatsby uses out of the box. So they have a tutorial on how to switch over to that, but I kind of ran out of time and gave up, because I did this all last week. Yep.
The other thing that we found to be a major pain, and this was largely the reason I said we shouldn't go this route, because I didn't think the use case matched up very well. We did a lot of paragraph-based stuff with the author having a fair amount of flexibility about what can go on a page. So then that creates both this preview problem, and it creates, which we decided you can't preview. Who needs to preview? Just write your stuff and post it out there. And it created the problem of, now on the React side, we had to write a component that would do this delegation based on, oh, I've got this chunk of my GraphQL response. That actually needs to be handled by this component to style it correctly. This chunk needs to be handled by this component. So the complexity of the React side was It wasn't crazy, but it was like way more difficult than it would have been to just theme the individual chunks if you were doing straight up monolithic side.
And so me personally, like all the sites that I have been working on at Turner, we've been like, headless is not the right answer here. This is not going to solve our issues. There are some other headless sites at Turner that they have, and they've kind of run into the same issues.
So it feels like the primary kind of use case is we just need to be able to deliver content in a straightforward manner and just let React or whatever the front end is basically just a presentation layer. And there's you don't really want any sort of logic or thinking process. It's just put the content in and then let the front end worry about display.
And that's why I think some of these science projects are kind of like, they're valuable for us, right? Because we want to get the experience, but they're kind of stupid in the real world, because if you control the front end and the back end, that's a tightly coupled team. Why wouldn't you do it in the simplest way possible? But where this shines is if you've got to output to kiosks, you've got to output to native mobile app, you've got to output to 2 different websites, and you don't know when you put the content in where it's going to be. But if you don't know that, then you shouldn't have this complicated schema where you're putting 18 different kinds of paragraphs on a page and trying to reorder them and get some exact rendering of what you
You're
want.
not really building pages, you're just building content.
Well, yeah, especially if you start thinking about personalization or deciding what the people want. You know, are you a client? Are you an investor or whatever? Then you could almost say, well, let's use the dynamic. Let's use something like React to give, and even with Gatsby to kind of give people, you know, the different front end. So you got a bunch of static pages, but the navigation is different. The way that things order are different based on some criteria.
Remember, this is a React application, so and what Gatsby do is just render like the minimum version of your site on the first load, just make it faster. But you have a React app, so whatever, you can do anything you can do. The did mount, you just call anything you want to. You can, if you want to manage the states, that you can use Readers, you can use Saga. You can keep your, Drupal site alive, or another API that you can pull data and you can hydrate your site again. So you can authenticate, create pages on the fly. Anything you can do with React. So people tend to see these for building this dummy, kind of static site, but it's good for, it's the starting point, that's good for it. Once you learn and understand, you can do way more things than that. Anything you can do with a React app.
But we had one customer where it actually made sense, and we ended up not working on that part of the project because they had an internal team that was very, very competent. But it was an insurance quoting application, but they needed to pull in content that was like, help content through form or explanations of various terms or whatever that the marketing team and the product team wanted to manage. But where we ended up telling them was like, none of this content already exists in Drupal, and it's not going to be reused anywhere else on the marketing website, and all you need is like super simple CRUD operations. So just use something like Keystone CMS. Like, why would you add in the complexity of Drupal just to have boxes that you type shit in?
And another big benefit of this, and that's what I think it's something you have, the Drupal providing the editorial experience, you provide front-end tools, mobile front-end tools for development, and a really fast site. You just deploy this to a CDN. But then, again, since you are deploying to a CDN, you are removing all the complexity about maintaining a production site live, with all this. Because what we tend to do as a Drupal developers, adding a lot of extra layers of cache for making our Drupal static. Why don't make it static from the early beginning if the project fits on that need? It's not only it's fast. Just think about all the complexity you are removing while doing it. Make your life easy. You don't have to worry about Drupal get up because your Drupal site is behind a firewall. You don't have to worry about whenever you're using Drupal, you have the Drupal. Let's say you have a module, then the module has an SDK library. So you have plenty of things to keep updated and secure and all that. Something like this, all that is gone.
Is Netlify a free service?
Yes. So Netlify has a free hosting that they'll do for pretty much everything from what I've seen. Like they'll host your website, and then where they actually make their money is if you want like a form on your website that posts back. So I mean, you could post back to Drupal, but they also have an option where you can post back to their server, and they'll capture all your data for you. And then they also have some wrappers that they've written. So they actually have like a React component for like Lambdas. So you'll actually just write this React component, and it'll post back to their Lambda, and then you can define what the Lambda does. And then there's something else that they do too, and I don't remember what that is right now. So I'm just gonna click on their website and they do a lot more than what I'm using them for. So as I'm on their website, so I have my custom domain through them. They do HTTPS automatically and HTTP2 automatically. So as soon as I pointed my domain over to Netlify, like it automatically got an HTTPS cert set up for me. I didn't have to do anything. I think I had to check a box maybe. It was, having done Let's Encrypt before, like this was fantastic. And then they'll do a preview, so I get a unique URL every time. If I make a new PR and I push a branch up, they're going to give me a unique URL that shows my build out on a server. So there we go. Identity, that's the other one. So they have an authentication service that you can buy from them.
Is there any, I mean, what's the, in this, if you try to go to production type stuff, you know, I know my boss's boss is going to say, well, you know, how does this compare to people like Acquia or Proteon or whatever the different services are? Gee, is this a startup and they might shut down, or they haven't had a major problem, so we don't know how they're going to react, and you know, so who are the Acquias and?
So, I guess at the same time, so they do have enterprise services that you can buy as well. Well, you'll get more of that. And then I think it was on their homepage. Where's it at? There we go. So all these people use Netlify. I was impressed. Like I was like, oh, it's some little like mom and pop shop, and then I started looking, and I'm like, oh, like Gatsby's website is hosted on Netlify, like Vue.js, Docker. I'm like, these are real companies.
Whoever lists Netlify as their competitor or whatever, why we're better than Netlify.
Yeah, and so I looked into it as much as I could I'm like, how do they actually host everything? So it says that they use AWS and Google Cloud Platform, and they do multi-region for you out of the box. I was like trying to figure out some actual details, and I couldn't get any. So.
Yeah.
So is Turner's probably self-hosting with their own DevOps?
Yeah, so we're moving everything into AWS. And then there's some teams who are in Azure or Google Cloud Platform, but we're trying to get everybody into the cloud and out of the CNN center.
Another nice thing is like whenever you have images, it takes care of building different versions of your image. So instead of when you load your page, instead of like the minimum version of the image, you can just blur it out of the box. Has all this beauty.
Kind of has the same thing as the Drupal styles where you can.
Yeah, it's kind of. So actually, what Gatsby has is a pre-process, event. It's kind of like Drupal. So the guy who wrote Gatsby, he was a Drupal developer, and he took a lot of ideas from Drupal. He used to work for Pantheon, and he was the guy who wrote the first dashboard, the Pantheon dashboard of the service. So he knows Drupal pretty. So he get a lot of ideas on the pre-processing, images, and the plugin system. So I mean, I can see that it's kind of like Drupal with a Node or React. You don't have to grind it. It's there already, and it do a lot of the things you need to do.
Yeah, his name's Kyle Matthews, and Lullabot, I believe, did a podcast with him like a month ago, and it's very excellent if you want to listen to a lot of why he built Gatsby and how he built Gatsby.
I have a question about ideas about when to rebuild, like when, like do you do a build when people stay in the node, or every week, or like what
Can you speak up?
Oh, speak up. Sorry.
Yeah.
So any ideas about when you should do a build, like when you should rebuild your site?
So for this static site, like I have to rebuild anytime my content changes. And so it'll go through and because it actually generates static HTML files. So like my about page had to be, like an HTML page had to be generated for my about page.
Right. If other people were creating content though, like how would you manage that?
Is that configurable in the Netlify module for Drupal? Can you say only rebuild once a day as opposed to every time something updates?
So the way that module works is that it's literally just a service call inside of hook entity update. So instead of using that module, like you could just write whatever you wanted.
Okay.
Or just wait 2 weeks and we were releasing something.
Yeah. I mean, you could have like a cron that runs at midnight.
Yeah, I mean, we're building a module. You can set a cron on save or add a click on your menu, the main menu. That's how we just build. We'll switch our blog posts, our blog site. Gatsby, we're working on migrating our company site as well. And yeah, you can just select what you want. Just go to, Netlify, generate a webhook, just copy and paste it in your site and select on save, on cron, or just add them manually, whatever you want.
And then the recommended module was actually called webhooks, and they are actually just like service actions that you can apply to an action. So you can actually like go into Drupal and use actions and run the webhooks.
Build and triggering a build on every site, it's pretty, way too many builds. There's several people working, then you have several builds running. It's like, maybe it works for a small site, or let one guy do entry. But at some point, it's way too many.
I could also say, the advantage of having a headless site is the fact that you could have a staging site that, that gets built every time you change your content. So your content editors can go out to the staging site and see what's going on. But meanwhile, your production site, maybe updating, whatever time period, either on demand, on a specific command, or every night or something like that. But I can see one of the advantages there too is if somebody does a major oops on the back end, your static site, you basically can just say don't build the production site, and so you've got that frozen at the revision while you correct all the stuff over here, and then once you're ready, you can.
I guess you could probably do that with the moderation module, right? So you could go in there and stage the content, and then when you decide that this content is approved, I want to publish it, and that could be.
Yeah, that probably depends on the security that the JSON. It gets back to with moderation assumes that you've got somebody logged in there. So you could potentially say, okay, I've got a site behind the firewall that the GraphSQL basically passes on some kind of certificate. Basically says, oh, I'm an editor. Show me the latest. Unreleased content.
Yeah.
There's probably some way to do it. How easy it is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'd never even thought of that. Like you could actually just, every time your site up, and then, like every night at midnight, be like, all right, like is everybody cool with their content? Like publish. And then the nice thing about Netlify is I actually have, like, here's every single build that I've done, which are all pretty much just turning on and off pages because I'm going in there and testing my React app. But I can go back to any one of these and, let's see, which one was that? There. So let's go back to yesterday's. Oh, look. So there's yesterday's. I don't know how to do that in Drupal. And here's. So now my about page is going to disappear.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but Gatsby is basically taking us back to the good old days of manual HTML, where your repository was,
There.
Here's the HTML for the site.
Yeah, FTP.
Yeah.
Yeah, so back to my flat files, and I have every single version of them out there that I can just click through whenever I want.
Kind of on the React side too, and stuff like that, you basically say, here's my staging server. You can do the standard kind of code deploy where if you're changing the actual code, not the content.
You can even shut down your Drupal at this very moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the other nice thing is that I have, like, my Drupal site's running in a VM on Amazon. So once I'm done publishing my blog posts, I can go into Amazon and I can be like, spin this down, save me some money.
There's a really interesting blog post on Gatsby site from a Drupal use case. I mean, how does $5,000, $5 amount for site? And then like, okay, and then you site is selected.
Yeah.
But the Drupal is, I mean, you still have a required Drupal, but it be like Droplet or a basic server on Amazon, whatever you want. And again, you don't require the complexity of the infrastructure.
Yeah. Is it possible to have a hybrid site though? I mean, I think about things like search and either you do them as a React plugin that's dynamic in Gatsby, or could you say, okay, here's some pages I'm converting to Gatsby. I have a whole bunch of pages which are kind of static, the about me, but I have like my resources pages which has all of my product data sheets and has views and stuff that's very complicated and probably hard to do as a static HTML site without generating 20 million pages. To have a site that would have, this is being served from Gatsby, this is being served either from Drupal, or I guess it would have to be a custom React.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that you have to do in Gatsby is you actually have to tell it like which pages do you want to create automatically, because you can actually make like static pages that are like physical static pages, or all my blog posts, like they actually get recreated, and that's kind of what the build process does, is it actually goes out and I say, give me all the articles, this is what the URL is going to look like, this is the React components that need to get used on that page, and then I just point it to that, and it goes out and generates all my pages for me.
Yeah, I'm thinking about things like, so we have a resource library which has several thousand pieces of PDFs, images, links to videos, that sort of thing. And, so you go there, you basically, in Drupal, it's a typical fancy view where it shows you page content, and you can search it, and you can select by product. And
you lose that, right?
Yeah, how would you do that in
There
a
are plugins
Gatsby
for
world?
that, for Adolia, Elasticsearch, you can keep using it. So anything that requires either pulling data from an external source or posting data to an external source, there's plugin for that. I mean, if you want to have a form, what ends up happening when you have a form in Drupal? You get into Drupal and then move that values to a CRM system. From here, you can make your forms post directly to your CRM tools for search things. Just have an Elasticsearch. Node, or just having an Adolia plugin, and then you can use that. There's React plugins for that on Gatsby. So actually, there is a plugin for that. Remember, there's a module for that. There's a plugin for that.
Yeah, except it's kind of hard to get, especially Drupal 8. The Solar API was the only place to get Drupal content into Elasticsearch, and it was always kind of alpha-ish on Drupal 7. They haven't done anything on Drupal 8. So I guess you could probably do the same thing with Solar. I'm sure there's probably a Solar plugin.
And it is like, even with Drupal, whenever you want to have a real search, you don't use Drupal, so you use something else. So it's tempting.
We got 533 plugins out there.
Yeah, something you didn't mention. Documentation is great. It's so simple. It's like explain things pretty well. I think one of them is like really easy to start.
And it's all open source. So it's like if you find documentation that doesn't look right, like I can go edit all this documentation myself and push back a pull request to them, and they'll send me a free t-shirt for helping them out.
So and the PR gets merged sooner than Drupal.
So actually, I was actually thinking there is I don't think I would ever do this, but I think there is a Frankenstein method. You basically could say, because ultimately, Gatsby has like a doc root that has all the HTML files in it. If the doc root was your Drupal, part of your Drupal site, then basically you could say, oh, these pages are Drupal. Oh, this menu item goes to an HTML file, which is actually generated from Gatsby. So you could kind of merge, you had a need for kind of like, kind of a hybrid site while you figured out all this stuff. You potentially could.
Wouldn't it be at a different domain?
Well, no, I'm saying basically you set Gatsby up to generate the HTML files to your doc root for your Drupal app.
And make those other links.
And so they're just HTML files sitting in there, and if you go to the site and you say go to aboutme.html, it's going to load the Gatsby generated HTML. If you go to My Wonderful View, it's going to load the Drupal page.
Well, yeah, it's.
Actually, I preface this with I'm not sure I would really want to do this.
Yeah.
It was just an idea.
I mean, we even build the tags, all the kind of like Drupal, you have taxonomies and you have a view. So we just grow this. 10 lines of GraphQL and we have our taxonomy page.
Yeah, it'd be a really great world if you could get to the point where in Drupal you could create a view and then there was a Gatsby, the right set of plugins that would then create that page for you without actually having to do anything other than go in and generate the view in Drupal.
Yeah, so that's most of what I wrote.
You don't even need the view. You can just write. It's so simple.
So most of what I ended up writing was I generated a slug and then I just used that as my page URL for Gatsby. So it's literally just taking what's in Drupal and replicating it out in React.
Something else as well, during the process of registering GraphQL nodes or Gatsby pages, you can add fields. You can add custom fields if you want. On your GraphQL definition, then you can reuse while doing, building your pages. So it's just true. Yeah.
So Gatsby is React only. So if you wanted to use Angular or Vue, do they have their own version of whatever Gatsby is?
So there's a tool called Next, which it's not a static site. But it's really similar to Gatsby, so it pretty much does everything for you, and then you just have to host the Node app. And I think Next is React, and then there's a tool called Nuxt, which is for Vue. NCAA.com uses that for their brackets, so it's actually a Nuxt app. I can show that if anybody cares.
Actually, I was told by the Gatsby maintainer about a Vue project, which is basically a fork. Just same thing as Gatsby, but in Vue.
I'm not surprised. I feel like Vue just takes all the great ideas that everyone else does and improves upon them.
If you go to the site, actually it's the same build blazing fast website for any CMS or data with Vue.
Is that right, Eric? So this is a Vue app that's running in Nuxt, and then Drupal actually goes out, fetches the HTML, and then injects it into a Drupal page so that we have server-side rendering in Drupal. I'm letting you all the secret sauce. It's weird, but apparently it worked really well.
What's the CNN site?
CNN Switzerland. So this is a Node.js site that's fronted by a GraphQL server that's fronted by a Drupal site. And then I've been told, I don't know where specifically, but if you go onto CNN.com, they actually pull in some of the content from that GraphQL server onto CNN. Freaking forest fires. So I don't know where specifically, but some of these stories may have originated in Drupal. Drupal help power CNN.com.
Oh, so Drupal writes the stories?
So, any other questions? So, I hoped you learned something. I learned so much doing all this, and it was a fantastic experience, and I'm glad you guys got to be part of it with me. Thank you.